A billionaire knelt at her son's grave, only to discover a waitress weeping beside it, holding a child who looked exactly like him. In the silent graveyard, the wind whispered through marble stones. A grieving mother, one of the richest women in the city, came to mourn her only son. But on this day, she wasn't alone. Just a few steps away, a black waitress sat trembling, clutching a little boy, tears falling onto the cold earth. What connected them would shatter everything the billionaire thought she knew. The billionaire froze, her breath caught in her chest. The child's face was hauntingly familiar, the same eyes, the same smile as her late son. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The waitress wiped her tears but couldn't speak. Fear and grief collided in the air, and the silence between them was heavier than the grave itself. The wind moved softly across the cemetery, stirring dry leaves that scratched against the marble stones, as if the earth itself was trying to echo the unspoken truth between them. The billionaire's hands trembled as she gripped her handbag tighter, her diamond rings glistening faintly in the gray light of dusk. She had built an empire out of nothing, turning pain into power, and yet in this moment, before the grave of her only child, she felt like the weakest woman in the world. And then her eyes fell back on the little boy. His small fingers clutched the waitress's dress tightly, his eyes wide, innocent, filled with confusion. He couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, but those eyes, they carried the exact reflection of her son's childhood photographs. She remembered them vividly, locked away in gilded frames back at her mansion, each picture a memory she could never erase. And now here they were again, staring back at her through the face of a stranger's child. Her voice quivered, breaking through the thick silence. "Please, tell me, who is he?" The waitress looked down at her son, her lips trembling as if words were too heavy to carry. She had spent years rehearsing what she might say if this day ever came, but the weight of reality crushed every line she had prepared. She had lived in shadows, raising her boy quietly, keeping him away from the powerful family that had never even known of his existence. And now, in the very place where love and loss intertwined, she stood face to face with the truth she could no longer bury. The billionaire stepped closer, her heels clicking against the stone path, the sound sharp and final, echoing like verdicts in a courtroom. Her eyes softened as she bent down slightly, trying to meet the child's gaze. He looked at her curiously, shy but not afraid, and in that single moment, her heart cracked open. It was as if her son had returned, not in flesh, but through this child's small frame and innocent smile. The waitress finally found her voice, though it was raw and broken. He's your grandson." The words came out in a whisper, but they struck like thunder, tearing through the billionaire's soul. She staggered back, her hand clutching her chest as though she had been pierced by something invisible. For years she had believed her son died, leaving nothing behind, no legacy, no family of his own, only the empire she had forced him to be part of. And now, standing in front of her, was the blood of her blood, a continuation she never dreamed existed. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of her vision. The little boy tilted his head, sensing the tension but too young to understand the depth of what was unfolding. He tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked innocently, "Mama, why are you crying?" That simple question shattered the dam within the billionaire. A sob escaped her lips, sharp and uncontrolled, echoing through the cemetery. She hadn't cried this way since the day she buried her son. Her knees buckled, and for the first time in her powerful life she fell to the ground, right there on the cold earth. The waitress rushed forward instinctively, wanting to help, but stopped herself, unsure if her touch would be welcomed or rejected. The billionaire's trembling hands reached out, not to the woman, but to the child. "Come here," she whispered, her voice breaking. The boy hesitated, looking up at his mother for permission. The waitress nodded slowly, her own tears streaming as she let him step forward. The billionaire pulled him gently into her arms, pressing him against her chest, as though holding onto a lifeline she thought she had lost forever. His warmth, his small heartbeat against her, filled the emptiness that had consumed her life for so long. It was as though the universe had given her a second chance, one she never expected, one she didn't think she deserved. The waitress stood silently, watching the scene unfold, her heart pounding with fear. Would this woman accept her child, or would she see him as a stain on her family's reputation, a hidden shame to be cast aside? She had lived too long in poverty to believe in miracles, but in this fragile moment, hope flickered like a candle refusing to die. The billionaire finally lifted her face, her tears glistening under the fading light. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and sorrow. The waitress swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Because I was afraid. Your son, he loved me, but he said you would never accept me. I was just a waitress, invisible in your world, and when he died, I thought it was safer to raise him alone than risk losing him too." Her voice cracked, and she clutched her chest as though the pain of all those years was finally spilling out. The billionaire closed her eyes, guilt crashing over her like a tidal wave. Memories surged, moments where she had scolded her son for being distracted, for not focusing on the empire she wanted him to inherit, for dreaming too freely. She had always thought she was protecting him, guiding him toward greatness. But now she realized she had blinded herself to the truth of his heart. He had loved, deeply and purely, and she had been too proud to see it. And because of that, She had lost him without ever knowing the fullness of his life. She opened her eyes again, looking at the boy still nestled against her. He gazed up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she whispered softly. The boy smiled shyly. "Michael," he said. The name sent another pang through her chest. What's the name of her late husband? The boy's grandfather, a man who had died before even meeting his own grandchild. Destiny, it seemed, had written this story with threads she could never untangle. The cemetery grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. But the three of them remained there, bound by grief, love, and revelation. The billionaire finally rose to her feet, still holding Michael's hand tightly. She turned to the waitress, her expression unreadable at first. The waitress braced herself for rejection, but instead, the older woman whispered, "You gave me back my son, and for that, I can never turn you away. This is just the opening flow. About 1,200 words so far. I can keep expanding until we reach 3,000 plus words, stating deep flashbacks of the son's life, emotional confrontations, the struggles of the waitress raising the child alone, the billionaire's inner guilt, a shocking twist about the son's hidden letters, and finally a powerful resolution of acceptance and healing." Finally, the waitress broke down. She confessed that years ago she had worked at a small cafe near the billionaire's estate. Her son, the billionaire's son, had fallen in love with her, but their worlds were too far apart. When he died suddenly, she was left alone with a child he never knew existed. The billionaire's heart shattered again, realizing her son had left behind not just memories but blood. The words echoed in the air, heavy and sharp, as if the whole cemetery had turned into a witness of this hidden truth. The billionaire, who had spent years hiding her pain behind polished diamonds, high walls, and a reputation untouchable by scandal, now felt stripped of everything. Her son, her only boy, the one she had raised with strict discipline, had loved quietly, loved deeply, and left behind a life that she had never been allowed to see. The billionaire's lips trembled, her hand clutched at her chest, as if her heart might tear open from the weight of it all. "My grandson," she whispered, her voice shaking. The waitress lowered her head, ashamed yet relieved, tears falling freely as she spoke. "I never wanted to hide him forever. I wanted to tell you, so many times, but I was just a waitress. I had nothing. Your son, he promised me he'd tell you himself, when the time was right. But then the accident. It happened before he ever could. I was left with nothing but grief and a child who looked like him every single day." Her voice cracked with pain, and her arms tightened around the boy beside her. The child, innocent and unaware of the storm swirling above him, looked up at both women with curious eyes. His small fingers tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, why are you crying?" he asked softly. The billionaire's heart clenched at the sound of his voice. It was light, gentle, yet it carried echoes of her son. She closed her eyes, fighting the flood of tears that threatened to overwhelm her. For years she had thought her son had left nothing behind, no family, no love, no continuation of his life. She had buried him, believing his story ended there. But now, standing before her, was proof that his bloodline still lived, that his love had created something pure and lasting. Her body shook as she knelt on the cold earth, her eyes level with the boy's. He looked at her with innocence, not yet understanding who she was or why she stared at him with such desperate longing. She reached out a trembling hand, hesitant, almost afraid that if she touched him, he might vanish like a ghost. But when her fingers brushed his soft cheek, the warmth that radiated from him shattered every wall she had built inside her heart. Tears spilled down her face. The waitress stepped back slightly, uncertain of what would come next. Her entire life since his birth had been a battle between fear and survival. She had cleaned tables, worked night shifts, starved herself so he could eat, all while hiding the truth from the world. She had dreaded this day, dreaded the moment the boy's powerful grandmother might appear, ready to snatch him away or condemn them both. Yet here they were, face to face, and the billionaire was not angry. She was broken. "Why didn't he tell me?" the billionaire whispered, her voice cracked by grief. "Why did my son carry this love in silence?" The waitress wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she replied, "Because he loved you too much. He didn't want to lose you. He knew you wanted him to marry someone of your world, someone powerful, someone worthy of your name. He thought he would have time to change your mind, but time betrayed us." The billionaire staggered to her feet, clutching her chest. Images of her son flooded her mind, the times he had come home distracted, the way he had resisted the blind dates she arranged, the quiet sadness in his eyes she never understood. Now it all made sense. He hadn't been restless because of rebellion. He had been in love. And she had been in love, too rigid, too consumed by her empire, too notice. Her knees weakened again, and she almost collapsed, but the waitress rushed forward instinctively, catching her by the arm. For a brief moment, both women's two souls tied by one man stood, connected in their shared grief. The billionaire looked at her, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as the woman her son had chosen, and though pride burned her throat, another feeling grew stronger, regret. The little boy, confused, reached for the billionaire's hand. "Don't cry," he said innocently. "Grandma." The word slipped out naturally as though he had always known her. The billionaire's breath caught. Grandma. She had thought she would never hear that word again, never feel the warmth of being a grandmother. And now here it was, given freely by a child who carried her son's blood. Her arms wrapped around him instinctively, pulling him close. She wept into his small shoulder, her sobs shaking both of them. The waitress pressed her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed by the sight. For years she had carried the burden of raising him alone, and now, perhaps, she was no longer alone. The billionaire pulled back just enough to look at the boy's face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she whispered. "Ethan," he said softly, though shyly proud. "Ethan James." The billionaire gasped. James, her son's name. She looked at the waitress in disbelief. The waitress nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I named him after his father, so he would never forget where he came from." The billionaire's tears fell harder, but now they were mixed with something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, for the first time since her son's funeral. Her heart felt alive, as though life had returned to her in the form of this boy. Darkness fell over the cemetery, but none of them moved. They stood together, bound by truth and loss, but also by love. The billionaire held Ethan's hand tightly, unwilling to let go. The waitress watched silently, uncertain of what the future held but knowing one thing for sure. The secret was no longer hers to carry alone. The billionaire finally spoke again, her voice fragile yet resolute. "He is my grandson, and I will not lose him, not now, not ever." The waitress's heart stopped. Fear flickered in her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice pleading. "He's all I have. Don't take him away from me." The billionaire looked at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, I don't want to take him from you. I want to share him because he belongs to both of us. And if my son were alive, this is what he would have wanted." At those words, something inside the waitress broke, something heavy, something painful that she had carried alone for too long. She fell to her knees, sobbing, relief flooding her body. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone in the world. The billionaire bent down beside her, wrapping one arm around her shoulder, the other around the boy. 3 lives, shattered by tragedy, now piecing themselves together in the quiet of a cemetery. And though grief still lingered in the air, something stronger had risen from it. The possibility of healing. The billionaire lifted her face to the sky, her tears shimmering in the moonlight. "My son," she whispered into the night, "I failed you once, but I swear I will not fail your family now." And in the silence that followed, it felt almost as if the night itself answered back. Tears streamed down the billionaire's face as she looked at the boy. She saw her son reborn in the child's innocent eyes. The waitress feared rejection, her heart pounding violently as she braced herself for the worst. For years she had lived with that fear that her son's wealthy family would shun her child, brand him an outsider, and rip him from her arms. But instead the billionaire opened her trembling arms, and her words carried the weight of a lifetime of grief and the beginning of something she thought impossible. "He is my grandson," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass under pressure. "And from this day forward, neither of you will ever cry alone again." The boy blinked up at her, sensing the depth of emotion but not fully understanding it. His small arms wrapped around the billionaire's neck, instinctively trusting the warmth of her embrace. For the billionaire, the world seemed to pause. In his little heartbeat against her chest, she felt the echo of her son, the same rhythm she had once felt when holding her baby boy decades ago. Time folded on itself. The pain that had defined her for so many years suddenly softened, as though the universe itself had decided to return what she had lost in a different form. The waitress stood frozen, tears burning her eyes, her breath trembling as though she was afraid even this moment might be stolen from her. She wanted to believe the billionaire's words, but a part of her still braced for betrayal. People like her, people from her world, were not supposed to mix with people like this woman, who owned skyscrapers, yachts, and an empire carved out of ambition. And yet, at this grave, before the marble stone that bore her son's name, they were equals, 2 grieving mothers, 2 broken hearts, 2 women tied forever by the love of a man who could no longer stand between them. The billionaire pulled away slightly, her hands cupping the boy's cheeks, her diamond rings glistening in the pale light. "What's your name?" she asked gently, though she already knew the answer deep in her soul. "Ethan," the boy said shyly, his small voice carrying into the silence of the cemetery. The billionaire's lips quivered. Ethan, not just a name, but a living testament. She glanced at the waitress, silently asking the question. Her heart screamed, "Why Ethan?" The waitress nodded softly. "Because it was the name he wanted for his first son. He told me once, over coffee, when the world outside felt too heavy. He said if he ever had a boy, he'd name him Ethan. I wanted to honor that." The billionaire gasped, covering her mouth. The memory hit her like a blade. She remembered her son as a teenager, once scribbling names in a notebook, telling her he liked the name Ethan. She had brushed it off, too busy talking about his future at university, at the company, in politics. She had forgotten. But he hadn't. He had carried that dream with him into a love she had never known about. And now, here it was, live, breathing, clinging to her hand. The billionaire sank to her knees again, clutching Ethan close, her tears soaking into his hair. "My Ethan," she whispered, "my boy's boy. You're part of him. You're part of me." The waitress broke down, covering her face with both hands, sobs shaking her body. For years, she had held on to the weight of silence, raising her son in the shadows, never daring to hope for acceptance. And now, before her eyes, the woman she feared most had not only accepted her child but claimed him with trembling love. The billionaire reached her free hand out to the waitress. It was hesitant, awkward, like a bridge built too late but still needed. "You loved him," she said, her voice still fragile. "You loved my son when I didn't see who he really was. You gave him what I couldn't to her heart without condition." Her lips trembled again, "And for that I owe you more than I can ever repay." The waitress shook her head quickly, still crying. "No, I never wanted anything. All I wanted was to love him, and when I lost him, all I wanted was to keep our child safe." The billionaire nodded, her tears endless. "Then we share that wish. Because I couldn't protect my son, but I will protect his son. I swear it." The three of them clung together in the fading light, shadows stretching long across the graveyard. The billionaire felt as though her empire, her wealth, her power, all of it meant nothing compared to this small, fragile boy now at the center of her life. And in that moment, she knew that every decision from this day forward would revolve around him. But deep inside, fear still lingered. Fear of what the world would say. Fear of how society would look at her grandson, born not of wealth but of love that had crossed boundaries. Fear of whether she was strong enough to rewrite her legacy to include him. Yet, when she looked into Ethan's eyes again, those fears melted into determination. She whispered to herself, so softly that only the night could hear, "This is my second chance, and I will not waste it."